Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's begin today's session of the Hindu's analysis with the first article that we have for you today, written by Shri M.K. Narayanan, the former director of IB and also the former governor of the state of West Bengal. Now, in this article, he points out the multiple challenges that India and specifically India's foreign policy and diplomats faces in the upcoming 2022 year. He says that the situation does not look good for India because everywhere you look, there are challenges. There are challenges on the Chinese front with their growing economy and their rising assertiveness towards India specifically. India has no options but to deal with it face to face. There are also issues about what is happening in Central Asia. At a time when India is trying to improve its relationship with the Central Asian nations, they also seem to be in a turmoil. Then India also has to make special efforts to balance its relationship with Russia and how the US reacts to it in the long run. And last but not the least, the return of Taliban in Afghanistan has again put all the security apparatus of India on high alert for any damage that they could do in the near future. So, in short, not a very happy article because the author concludes it by saying that 2022 does not look very bright for India. So let's see in detail what is this article all about. So it first starts with the challenge of China. The author says that China's GDP, that is over $15.5 trillion right now, is a major challenge to India. In fact, the net worth of China right now is estimated to be much more than the US as well. Just in comparison, India's GDP is about less than $3 trillion right now. China is challenging the US on all counts at a time when the US is trying to reduce its military footprint in the Indo-Pacific region. China, on the other hand, is aggressively reaching out to as many small and large nations as possible in the Indo-Pacific and increasingly investing more and more money in these nations to bring it closer. China's policy of one country, two system that it used to apply to Hong Kong and Taiwan also does not seem to stop China now from forcing itself on Hong Kong and Taiwan. Over the past couple of years, China has been taking away the liberal policies that Hong Kong had made, and China is trying to ensure that it rules Hong Kong with an iron hand, just like it rules the mainland. China's issue with Taiwan also have been in the news all throughout the year, and we have read about them as well multiple times. Although there is a slight dip in China's economic profile in the last 1.5 years, but China has not acknowledged that to the world and in fact is going ahead with its policies of expansion. Now there is something that I would like to point out here. As a policy of the state, China has never accepted any weakness whatsoever. Let me give you a few examples. For instance, in 1962 war, China also lost quite a few soldiers, but for about 20 to 30 years, they never released a record of how many soldiers lost their life from the Chinese side. Countries such as India never do that. We give real-time data of the brave soldiers who have lost their lives fighting for their country in India. But China does not do so. Why? Because they think acknowledging even one single death would lead to a feeling of weakness that they don't want. In fact, in the Galwan Valley clash, where a lot of international media news reported that many Chinese soldiers also lost their life, China has never officially declared their death toll. We only got to know about the people who lost their life in China when China recently decided to give military honors to the people who lost their life, mentioning that some of them had lost their life in the Galwan Valley clash. Let me give you another very interesting example. There was a news in the international media last week that in China, there is a news spreading that some soldiers of China have frozen to death along the LAC. In fact, it was one of the most searched things in China last week where people went online and searched for frozen soldiers at the LAC. But the Chinese government kept quiet on that matter and has never spoken a word. So if there is any incident that shows even the slightest of weakness from China on economic terms, on strategic terms, on military terms, you can be rest assured that China will never accept it on ground. And thus, the countries will have to measure their response against China accordingly. The next challenge that the author points out is about the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Now, you may say that there are not enough direct implications for India as such in between the Ukraine-Russia conflict, but if you look at the larger picture, it involves India as well. How? Our relationship with Russia is one of the oldest that we have had since our independence, and USA has never been very fond of it. Now, in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine is supported by NATO, which is headed by US, and Russia, on the other hand, is against the expansion of NATO. So India again has to choose very carefully which side is it taking. So far, India has remained quiet on this issue, but it might not be very long when India would be forced to take at least one side, and then it would become again an issue for India about which side does it choose, because we are not living in a world of non-alignment right now. Similarly, the ongoing unrest in Kazakhstan, which has not stopped completely, is a concern for India. It comes at a time when India was specially trying to improve its relationship and connectivity with the Central Asian nations. Kazakhstan, being the most prosperous of them, would have played a major role. But the ongoing unrest in Kazakhstan against the government also puts the spotlight on how India responds to that issue. Usually, India has not been very proactive in responding to international issues, and usually we avoid taking one of the sides unless it is absolutely necessary. The third and perhaps the biggest challenge, as per the author, to India's foreign policy would be the return of Taliban. Although we knew that one day the American forces have to withdraw from Afghanistan, but no one had expected that it would be all of a sudden and the Taliban would come back to power so soon after the US withdrawal. That puts a lot of challenges on India and other countries in the neighborhood. When Taliban initially came to power again in Kabul, Pakistan was an extremely happy country, thinking that now they would be able to control Afghanistan. But now even Pakistan has found out that it is not in their hands to control the working of Taliban. Pakistan, in fact, is on the verge of bankruptcy, and they are facing their own economic issues and are lined up at the IMF for loan after loan. Taliban and Pakistan, in fact, are not the only two places from where India has to worry about the rise of radical elements. In fact, there have also been news coming out from Indonesia where radical resurgence is being seen. Indonesia again is one of the few nations that has been outspoken against India, especially on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. Thus, the author says that 2022 will be an extremely busy year for India's policymakers and diplomats if India has to stand its ground on all these issues. Not just this, India continues to face border issues as well, with China not in a mood to back down or go back to the status quo. India's membership of Quad has forced China to be extremely assertive towards India, apart from India's policies with respect to Jammu and Kashmir. You would know that after the Jammu and Kashmir reorganization bill was passed, the Home Minister made a statement that India will take back other areas as well, including Aksai Chin, which did not go well with China since the area is in their control. India thus needs to gather all its energy to counter China's attempts to change the status quo at the border. There have also been a lot of news coming in about China's new innovations for its military. China, for example, is attempting to use low yield nuclear weapons during conventional warfare and have also been talking about inducting new nuclear power ballistic missile submarines into their existing fleet. All of these again present a handful of challenge for India. The other area where India again has to put its focus is on Central Asia and West Asia. Central Asia again remains a place where India has not been extremely active, but it presents an opportunity for India since that is an energy rich region. And if India can ensure good connectivity with Central Asia, it augurs well for the country. With respect to West Asia, it is one of the most tumultuous areas in the entire world, with changes happening every single week. To maintain a stable relationship with most of the nations in West Asia, since a lot of our people are working in the Middle East, remains a challenge for India once again. India recently attended a meeting where Israel, UAE, and the US also took part, which was considered as the second Quad grouping. Although nothing has been formalized as of now on the second Quad, but still, it is a challenge for India to maintain a fine balance between all the nations in the Middle East who are not really at good terms with each other. Thus, India's foreign policy needs to be extremely flexible, aware of its surroundings, and must take decisions according to India's need proactively. Now, the author has been successful in painting a pretty gloomy picture with respect to what lies in store for India in the upcoming year. But let's try and shift our focus a bit on what is happening in our neighboring country, that is China. There have been multiple reports in the past few months that China might be facing an economic decline after a couple of decades. And there are numbers that prove it. Let me give you some data so that you can also understand, is the Chinese economy in a decline or not. Recently, the People's Bank of China cut down their CRR, the cash reserve ratio, that is the amount of cash that the banks need to keep with themselves. The Chinese banks were told that the CRR that now you have to maintain is lower by 0.5%. Thus, you can lend more money to businesses and people. This is being done because there is a slowdown that is being seen in the Chinese economy, with consumption going considerably lower as compared to the previous levels. In 2021, the Chinese growth, despite claims that they have not been affected by COVID, was pretty slow. In the second quarter, the GDP grew at 7.9%, but in the third quarter of 2021, it only grew by 4.9%, thus indicating that China was also impacted by the COVID pandemic as much as the rest of the world. The country is facing major supply disruptions such as shortage of electronic chips, coal, steel, etc. Experts have also pointed out that it is not just a pandemic that has hit the Chinese growth. Growth in China, in fact, was declining well before the pandemic. In 2007 second quarter, China had hit a growth rate of 15%, that was brought down to only 6% in 2019. The property sector, which gives a real push to the growth of China, contributes about one quarter of Chinese economy. But that sector also has been going downhill, with the prices of property declining and the construction activity slowing down in the past few years. The other sector which propels the growth of China has always been export, but there are issues with export as well. For instance, the cost of labor is increasing, and other countries in the neighborhood such as Bangladesh, Vietnam and Indonesia are giving a pretty tough competition to China. A lot of merchandise, shoes, clothes, etc., their manufacturing units have recently shifted to Vietnam and Bangladesh. Thus, China's dominance over these sectors is also on a decline. At the same time, after decades of following the one child policy and preference for male babies, China is now facing a decline in the fertility rate. Means the dependency ratio is increasing. So the number of people who are dependent on the government subsidies is increasing, and the number of people who are working and paying taxes is on a decline. The government, in order to ensure that the growth remains steady, has been trying to take over the private sector also, calling it common prosperity. That has led to a crackdown on a number of private businesses in China, including the Alibaba Group, which was not allowed to issue an IPO in the market. With these crackdowns, the foreign investors have also started to dump the Chinese stocks in the past few months and are withdrawing their exposure to China. Again, as the author said, Chinese government will never accept all these realities in public, but the facts are for everyone to see over here that China might be past its prime now. And they are trying to make it up by showing even more aggression on their neighbors. The next article that we have here is written by the Secretary of Ministry of Animal Husbandry and Dairying. He talks about the latest policy initiative by the Government of India to introduce mobile veterinary units that will be a game changer for the farming livestock. Now let me explain to you in short what is the article about. The author here says that the livestock farmers, the farmers who have cattle, have an extremely hard time in taking care of these cattle. There is a shortage of veterinary doctors in the villages especially. Even when they are available, they charge a pretty high cost. For most of the villagers, they have to travel to far away distances with their cattle when they fall ill with various diseases. That leads to number one, shortage of milk and other supplies from these animals, thus cutting down their earning. Secondly, it also takes time for them to travel to and fro, and thus the entire business of livestock farming is extremely difficult in India. Now, the government of India, after realizing this, has started mobile veterinary units. Means, in simple terms, it will be a moving ambulance or a moving hospital where a four-wheeler would go to the farmer's place, do a checkup on the livestock or the cattle of the farmer. Whatever is wrong with the livestock, the medicine would be given. If a small procedure has to be conducted, then this ambulance would be capable of doing that also. There would be a veterinary doctor in this ambulance, and he or she will take care of the cattle. That would cut down on the need of the farmer to travel from the villages to far off distances, and would also give them the expert care that they deserve. This is the gist of the entire article. Now let's look at some of the facts that the article has pointed towards. The author says that as per the 20th livestock census in India, there are about 53.7 crore livestock in India, with about 95.8% just in the rural areas. And the problem is that it is in the rural areas that we don't have enough veterinary services, and thus the farmers have to make special efforts to take care of their livestock. Under the Livestock Health and Disease Control Program, the government has identified this issue and is trying to rectify this by using mobile veterinary units called as MVUs, or moving hospitals. The Parliamentary Standing Committee of Union Ministry of Fisheries, Animal Husbandry and Dairying recently observed that we need to have adequate testing and treatment facilities for veterinary diseases, which pose a major challenge. Before this initiative, so far, the government has been providing doorstep services, but only related to artificial insemination and vaccination for the livestock. But now, this MVU will change the model entirely and bring in almost all the services that the farmers require at their footstep. Right now, there are no testing facilities in the villages. There are COGs. COGs means unqualified doctors who don't really have a real degree. There are untrained medical health workers, which are mushrooming, mainly because they charge a lower fee, and the farmers can't afford to go to far off distances with their cattle just to get a health checkup done. Because of this, there are many problems, such as the problem of mastitis. It is a common livestock disease which leads to lowering of milk production in the livestock. These untrained animal health workers, because they don't really know real science, whenever they see a disease in an animal, they prescribe antibiotics, which leads to consumption of lot more antibiotics than necessary. Thus, there is also a problem of antimicrobial resistance seen in these livestock. WHO also has identified the problem of antibiotic resistance as a greatest threat to human health as well. The MK Jain committee that gave its report in 2019 said that livestock farmers in fact face much greater challenges as compared to traditional agricultural farmers, since for livestock farmers, it is very difficult to take loan from the bank. There are only about 66,000 veterinary hospitals, polyclinics, dispensaries across the entire country. Thus, the MVUs will come in very handy. These MVUs will be a four-wheeler van and will have a space to accommodate one veterinarian, one para-veterinarian, so kind of an assistant, and a driver come attendant. There will also be space for equipments for diagnosis, treatment, and also minor surgery. All these vehicles will be tracked using the GPS technology. As per the policy of the government is envisaging having one MVU for 1 lakh animal, but if there are regions with difficult terrain, the number might be increased. Not just the farmers, it is also in the interest of the entire country that livestock are taken care of. Why? Around 70% of India's milk supply is sourced from those farmers who have less than 5 animals. Now imagine if one or two of these animals fall ill and are not being able to produce the kind of milk that we require. It would lead to a disruption in the milk supply. Just mastitis disease alone amounts to a milk loss of about 10 liters per day per farm. Means a loss in the earning of about rupees 350 day per farm, which can be a big number for the farmers. These MVU units are running successfully in some of the states such as Andhra Pradesh, etc., and have given successful results. And now it is time to implement them across the entire country. Last but not the least, these MVUs will also lead to increased employment opportunities for those experts who are working in the field of animal care, and will give a push to this sector as well. Now let's see what are the other aspects of the Livestock Health and Disease Control Scheme under which this vehicle has been launched. So there are multiple activities that are covered under this scheme, including Critical Animal Disease Control Program called CADCP to eradicate two major diseases, namely Peste des Petits Ruminants, which is also known as the sheep and the goat plague, and the classical swine fever. Apart from this, The mission also talks about establishment and strengthening of existing veterinary hospitals and dispensaries, the mobile veterinary units that we talked about, and others. In this program, the funding pattern is that 100% central assistance will be given for the CADCP, that is a program to eradicate two main diseases, and for non-recurring expenditure, that is an expenditure that only has to be made once, again 100% assistance will be given by the center government. For example, if you have to buy a four-wheeler, that is a non-recurring expenditure, so that expenditure will be borne 100% by the central government. For non-recurring expenditure means salaries etc. that has to be paid every single month. It will be shared 60-40 between the central and the state governments. Let's look at the different components of the scheme one by one. First, as I said, Peste des Petits Ruminants, also known as a sheep and the goat plague eradication program. It covers all the sheep and goat population in the country. Then we have the classical swine fever control program to control the classical swine fever, and it would be 100% covered, and it has been expanded to cover 100% of the entire pig population with 100% central assistance. The other component of the scheme is establishing and strengthening the existing veterinary hospitals and dispensaries and mobile veterinary units that we just discussed about. The fourth component of the program is assistance to the states for control of animal diseases. That includes helping the states with vaccinations against economically important diseases of livestock, mainly anthrax, rabies, etc. Financial assistance will also be given towards a payment of compensation to the farmers if the livestock has caught diseases such as a swine fever and the birds need to be killed and infected animals need to be eliminated. For compensating that, the farmers will be given assistance by the government as well. The next article that we have again takes us back to the issue of China and Lithuania. If you remember, just a few days back, we did talk about the China-Lithuania issue that started when Lithuania allowed Taiwan to open up their special representative office using the name Taiwan, which China did not appreciate. Since then, China has retaliated and has downgraded its diplomatic relationship with Lithuania, calling back its ambassador and cutting down on all the trade that they have with Lithuania. Since Lithuania is a member of the European Union, this now presents a challenge to the EU about how does it actually tackle this issue. EU has shown solidarity with Lithuania so far, but considering that EU is majorly dependent on China and has a trade of $828 billion, it needs to be seen whether they can take any concrete steps against China or not. It must be noted that Taiwan does have such offices in other parts of the world as well, including India, but the difference is those offices are named as Taipei Economic and Cultural Centers and are not allowed to use the word Taiwan, which Lithuania has allowed, which has become the center of all the dispute. China, in fact, has pressurized the European companies if they want to send their product to China, they can't take any of the components from Lithuania. Otherwise, those products will not be allowed to enter China. Now, we have already discussed in the past CNAs about why Lithuania might be doing it and the possibility of the US backing up Lithuania. But one of the other points is that Lithuania, unlike many other countries in Europe, is not extremely dependent on China. So for them to boycott China and Chinese products does not come at a very big economic cost because they don't import a lot of stuff from China and in fact have a trade surplus with China. They don't really have a lot of danger in China taking such retaliatory economic actions against them. And that may be a reason why Lithuania is doing it, while the other EU nations can't afford to do the same. This also presents a chance to other countries such as India and other smaller nations that might have been thinking of standing up against China about how China reacts and how exactly does it impose its thinking on nations such as Lithuania. So the entire world right now is watching a battle between David and Goliath. So this is an ongoing issue and every single day there are certain new developments that are taking place. So let me give you a couple of developments that have taken place in the past few days. So the current government of Lithuania is a coalition government. The current president of Lithuania comes from a political party which does not want to have bad relations with China. So much so that Lithuania's president recently said to the press that the naming of the embassy actually was a mistake and I was not consulted. If I would have been consulted, I would never have allowed this. But his own foreign minister, who is from a different party because of a coalition government, said that no, the president is lying. He was consulted at every single step. So now he can't say that he was not consulted. So even in the ruling government of Lithuania, there is no consensus about how exactly to deal with the issue. Recently, Taiwan's representative office, because of which the entire issue has started, announced that we will be setting up a $200 million investment fund for Lithuanian industries, specifically giving them guidance on semiconductors, which is a part of EU's long-term plan. EU, in fact, plans to produce 20% of the world's semiconductors by 2030. So this is a step in that direction, since Taiwan is one of the world's leaders when it comes to production of semiconductors and chips. In fact, last year, before all this issue had started, a delegation of Taiwan businesses had toured Lithuania and discussed setting up a silicon processing plant to make microchips, which are at a short supply throughout the world. The reason why this partnership can go on is Lithuania produces rare high-grade quartz sand, which is vital for the production of these chips and are essential for the technologies from which smartphones and electric vehicles are made. This leaves European Union in a very interesting situation. On one hand, they don't really want China to put more sanctions against other countries of EU because they're highly dependent on the Chinese imports. On the other hand, their aim of becoming a hub for production of semiconductors will go a long way if they maintain good relationship with Taiwan. So the coming times we'll see some interesting policy decisions being taken on both the sides. The next article that we have talks about Kerala government's ambitious Silver Line project that we did discuss earlier as well. As you would know, the Kerala government right now is in the process of implementing the Silver Line project that proposes to connect the north and the south parts of the state with a railway track that would take considerably lesser time. The project will connect Kochi with the rest of the state in 2 hours, Kasaragod in the north and Thiruvananthapuram in the south in 4 hours. A journey that right now takes about 12 hours can be cut down to 4 hours. This is the proposal of the Silver Line project. It will be a semi-high-speed railway project with a train traveling at a speed of about 220 kilometers per hour as compared to the current speed of 40 to 50 kilometers per hour. That is because the current track has a lot of curves and is not designed to handle high-speed trains. Now, the reason that the Kerala government is going ahead with this is because of the geography of Kerala and the traffic issues that it faces because of that geography. If you look at the map of Kerala, it's more of a linear state. It has highways about 1800 kilometers which are heavily choked. If Silver Line project becomes a reality, it would be able to transport 80,000 people daily and reduce about 20,000 passenger car trips on the roads, thus decongesting the roads considerably. Kerala, in fact, has more vehicles per capita population as compared to the average of India. Kerala has about 441 vehicles per 1,000 people. Between 2009 and 2019, the registered vehicles in Kerala grew at a rate of 10.62%. as compared to India's average of 9.9%. Every single year, about 2 lakh new passenger cars or SUVs are added on Kerala's roads, which is making the situation even worse. Most of these transportation modes are used for commuting for work. Thus, if Kerala does not tackle this situation of growing traffic and increasing time that people are spending on the roads, it will eventually hit the economic output of the people in the state, and thus the government has to take a step in that direction. The author here says that this is not the first time that such a project has been proposed. The previous governments also had proposed a project of a railway line that would travel at 350 kilometers per hour. The project was supposed to cost about 1 lakh crore rupees, but it was later on struck down by the experts since it was found to be unfeasible. The Silver Line project is supposed to be a joint venture between the Kerala Rail Development Corporation and the Ministry of Railways and would require a sum of 64,000 crore rupees borrowed from external borrowers. This is also one of the major points of contention, with the experts saying that a state of the size of Kerala cannot afford to take this loan because it would not be sensibly sound. But the state government is going ahead with the project and trying to acquire the land at a pretty fast pace. Apart from the economic concerns, the article also talks about some other concerns that the project is facing. It will lead to displacement and rehabilitation of about 10,000 families from 1,200 hectares of land. Now, whenever you have so many people displacing, government taking over their land, the government does offer them compensation in the form of land or cash, but you will always see that a certain section of population does not get what they deserve because of all the corruption. And even if they do get it, the payments are delayed because of all the red tape that exists in the government. So that is a major concern. Then there are environmental concerns also. It would lead down to a lot of interference in the green belt area of Kerala, especially in the zones of ecological diversity. That is what the experts are concerned about. If you look at the topography of Kerala, there is a steep drainage from east to west, and many people speculate that the details of the project show that the steepness might increase even further with this project. Thus, the constant flooding that Kerala is seeing these years, unfortunately, may become even more intense with this project. The government, on the other hand, is quick to point out its own positive points about the project. For example, the project will have green powered electric powertrain, which will replace 150 internal combustion engines each time that a train takes a trip. Thus, its environmental benefit would far outrun the environmental harm that it would cause. But the author here wants the government to be cautious. The article here says that the Silver Line project might have good intention, but exclusively the Silver Line project is not sufficient to tackle the problems of traffic in Kerala. Kerala is blessed with a lot of waterways, and thus the government must also develop the eco friendly methods of inland navigation to decongest the clogged highways, and this will lead to a reduction of traffic by about 15%. This would harm the environment much lesser and is much more sustainable in the long run, and thus the government can look towards that also. The article ends by saying that rather than taking up a one-off project and thinking that it will end all the problems of Kerala is the wrong approach. There needs to be a long-term plan set up of the next 20 to 30 to 40 years and see what projects exactly do we need to take up so that in the long term the state becomes a better place to live. We also have to focus on civic amenities, investment projects, and establishing traffic corridors to ensure that economy and environment of the state go ahead hand in hand. Now, since we have discussed this particular topic multiple times earlier as well, there is nothing new that has developed. But just to show you how exactly is this project envisaged and how does it compare to the existing railway track. So the Silver Line Corridor project will go from north to south. As I said earlier, if you look at the map of Kerala, it is a linear state. Thus, connectivity will always be a challenge in the state of Kerala. The current track that was built pretty earlier on has this alignment. The red line that you see is the old existing track. It has a lot of curves, because of which the speed of the train can only reach maximum of 40 to 50 km per hour. However, the current Silver Line project is expected to be on the lines of the green line that you see here. It is a revised alignment, allowing the trains to travel at a much faster speed of about 4 to 5x as compared to the existing speed limit that we have on this corridor. The deadline for this project as per the government is 2025. Right now we are at the stage of land acquisition, which usually takes the most amount of time. So let's see whether or not the project goes ahead and meets the deadline or not. The next article takes us back to the India-Nepal relations and the unsolved issues that we are still facing. Now, before we go ahead, this article is not a new article. In fact, the write-up starts by saying that this article was published in May 2020, and we are publishing this once again because the situation is the same. So just imagine we are about 18-19 months past May 2020 and we are still facing with the same issue between India and Nepal. Editor of the Hindu would have thought that in 2020 May, most probably people preparing for 2021 attempt would have read this article. So let me paste the same article for those who are preparing for 2022 and save some effort because the issue is still the same. The reason why this article is published is recently the Prime Minister made a speech in Haldwani where he stated that there is an ongoing road construction at Lipu Lake and even further. Now, these words such as Kala Pani, Lipu Lake have been the buzzwords between India-Nepal relations over the past few years because Nepal claims that these areas come under their territory and these issues have not been resolved till now. We have discussed multiple times using the map about how Nepal and India feel about this particular issue. And we have also discussed about the strategic implications of whether or not these areas stand in India or in Nepal. The reason why this is so significant is Lippu Lake is a tri-junction point between India, Nepal and China. So the reason why India wants possession of Lippu Lake and Kalapani is not something to do with Nepal, but it is mostly concerned with China. Because if we have possession of these places which are ours only, it would give us a strengthening position as compared to the Chinese troops on the border. Lippu Lake Pass, as you know, is one of the points through which the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra goes from India to Tibet. Now, the boundary between India and Nepal is the Kali River, and I will show you a map in just a bit so that the situation becomes much more clear to you. The existing boundary between the two sides was actually finalized in a Treaty of Sagoli in 1816. The treaty was signed between the Gorkhas, that is from Nepal, and the East India Company in India under Lord Hastings at that time. The same Lord Hastings that had introduced the concept of paramountcy. The treaty simply says that if this is the Kali River, territory towards the east of Kali River will be Nepal. Seems to be pretty simple, right? But the dispute is about the origin of the Kali River. As per Nepal and as per India, the origin points of Kali rivers are different, and that is what leads to the protest. Let me first show you the map to clarify what the two sides mean by this. As per Nepal, the Kali River starts here at Limpiadhura and goes something like this. Thus, India's boundary ends at this point, and the area highlighted with orange color belongs to Nepal. However, as per India, the Kali River originates from the streams which are somewhere below Lippu Lake Pass. So this is what the Kali River looks like, and this is Kali River's boundary. So this particular area belongs to India because Kali River starts from here only. So this is the problem between India and Nepal. That is the route taken by the Kali River. This route is accepted by both the countries. But before here, where did the Kali River originate? That is a problem. Now, to be true, this dispute has not really been an issue between the two countries till 1990s. The local population that lives in that area anyways had open borders, so they could move from one place to the other very easily. So there was not much of an issue between the two countries. In fact, in 1996, India signed the Treaty of Mahakali, which divided the water of River Kali, and we even took up the Pancheshwar multi-purpose hydel project. The first time that this issue of Kali River came up was only in 1997. But even then, both the sides did not really make an issue out of it. The big problem started in 2019. So in November 2019, the Survey of India issued a new map of India, because now we had to show Jammu Kashmir as divided into Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh and as two union territories. There was no change in this new map that came up in 2019 with respect to India-Nepal border. But when the new map came up, Nepal registered a protest that we are not happy with this map. Although, as I said, nothing was changed on India-Nepal border. This also had to do with what was happening in Nepal. Nepal's Prime Minister Mr. KP Oli was in a difficult situation in Nepal with his support declining, and Chinese influence in the Nepalese government was increasing. It is said that it was at the asking of the Chinese government that Nepal made an issue out of it. The Nepalese Prime Minister, in fact, was also blamed in his country for not handling COVID well, and he had to find a distraction in the country, and that is when the Nepal government came up with this issue of map dispute with India. Although India also initially did not handle the issue well. As per the article, the Chief of Army Staff of India had said that Nepal may have raised this issue at the behest of someone else. Now that may be a fact, but it's an insensitive statement to make, considering that the Chief of Army Staff of India is an honorary general in the Nepal army and vice versa. Thus, it does not augur well for the relationship between the two countries, especially considering that Indian army had a lot of soldiers from Nepal right now. Although the government has been very outspoken about its neighborhood first policy, but it has not really given the kind of results that we would have wanted on ground. The relationship with Nepal has only become worse since 2015, when Nepal made its new constitution. As we discussed earlier, in 2015, when Nepal came out with its new constitution, India apparently was not happy with it due to various reasons, but we never said anything against it. officially. After the constitution was finalized, Nepalese government blamed India for unofficial blockade of Nepal. So Nepal, because it's a landlocked country, depends on India for many essential commodities including milk, oil, etc., which go from India to Nepal every single day on trucks. During this 2015 crisis, when Nepal had made a new constitution, hundreds of trucks were stranded on the India-Nepal border and they were not entering Nepal. Indian government said that our trucks want to enter Nepal, but because people are protesting inside Nepal, the truck drivers are not allowed to go inside. Nepal, on the other hand, is saying that no one is protesting. Indian government just does not want to help us and does not want to send the trucks. This hurt the relationship between the two nations and in fact allowed China to take up that vacuum and start supplying all these products to Nepal. Since then, India-Nepal relations have not really improved considerably. Now, it is also important to understand the significance of the bilateral relations that we have with Nepal. We have ties with Nepal on a lot of different levels. Religion, for example, plays a binding role between the two sides. Hinduism remains the most followed religion in both the nations. In fact, many people from India go to Nepal and vice versa for visiting religious places in the two countries. Since its geographical position makes it a buffer state between India and China, it's a very significant country for both these nations. Many Nepali citizens are deployed in the Indian Defence Forces right now. India has diverse relationships with different political parties in Nepal. For instance, Nepali Congress has usually had warm relations with India, but the communist parties, which are a part of the ruling coalition, usually have tilted towards China. Because of its landlocked topography, Nepal is dependent on India for a lot of economic help. For instance, a lot of hydroelectric power projects in Nepal has been built with India's expertise. There have been major water deals such as the Kosi Agreement, the Gandak Treaty, Mahakali Treaty, etc. India, in fact, also exports hydroelectric power to Nepal for its sustenance. Not just this, India has a lot of Nepalese citizens working here because they don't require a special visa to enter India. They are allowed to take up most of the jobs that Indian citizens take in India. A lot of Nepali citizens also come here for higher education since Mandarin does not come naturally to Nepali citizens. However, Nepal's approval to the One Belt One Road initiative of China has not gone down well with India. Nepal, on the other hand, is doing this to come in the good books of China and needs their economic help. There is also an issue of Madhesis. So Madhesis are people who have their roots from India. A lot of people from Bihar have shifted to Nepal for economic opportunities. Those are considered as Madhesis. They have historical, linguistic and cross-border ties with India. In fact, whenever Nepalese government takes up any decision that goes against India, it is the Madhesis that usually protest against the Nepalese government in Nepal. When the issue of blockade started in 2015 again, India had said that it is the Madhesi population of Nepal itself that is protesting and we don't control them and we can't stop them unless the government of Nepal does something in their favor. Thus, to sum it up, India cannot afford to have one other bad relationship in our neighborhood, and it is time to ensure that our relationship with Nepal becomes much better because we don't want to waste energy on a neighbor that could have been a much better friend of India. These were the articles we wanted to discuss from the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. Ensuring better India-Nepal relations is in the best interest of both the nations. Suggest some diplomatic measures that can be taken by the Indian government to improve the bilateral relations with our Himalayan neighbor. Second, livestock farming has the potential to reduce farmer stress in India. Do you agree? What steps has the government taken to support livestock farmers in India? Both the questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.